today we're going to study a little bit together Parashat Shmini, which is the Parashat HaShavua. So I was instructed by those who invited me to participate. And once again, I thank the Klei Kodesh, the clergy of this fine institution, for inviting us. There are some additional papers here, I think. If anybody wants the text, we can make sure that it's available. Trust me when I tell you, I'm like a pitcher who hasn't been pitching for a while. Right, I was a congregational rabbi, taught a lot of Torah on a daily basis. Today, I teach Torah in a somewhat different fashion. So in preparation for this session, we have more pages that we will cover in 9 weeks, okay? But we will cherry pick some of the materials that are in front of you, looking not only for what they mean and what their historical context might be. You don't study Torah for history, by the way, okay? You don't study Torah for history. You study Torah for meaning. Because the Torah does not mean Bible. The word Torah means?
Teaching.
Teaching, nachon, like mora and hora, right? Teaching or parent, it's about instruction. So you're looking for instruction. Sometimes instruction comes in do this, do that in a commandative kind of way. And other times it's a much more allegorical orientation. Are you looking for the text?
Yeah.
Very good. Welcome. You want two? One for each eye?
Yeah. One for each. Yeah.
One for each hand. Very good. And on the other hand, very good. So we study Torah for instruction. And I'll say it even more deeply since I mentioned the term Neo-Hasidic earlier. We are looking for existential meaning, right? Meaning that's consequential and personal to us. And so when we study the text, it's very, very wonderful to look at what the text says. And it's important to understand the historical context. And it's important to understand where the story lies in the Torah. Though our rabbis teach us, En mukdamu mochar b'Torah, there's no early and late in the Torah, meaning historicity is inconsequential to those people who study Torah for its depth. We're looking for a depth model. What does this text, what do these texts, what do the commentators on these texts try to derive? And what can we derive, sitting as we are here in the holy city? Are we in Pepper Pike or Beechwood?
Pepper Pike.
Oh, Pepper Pike, Baruch Hashem, the taxes went up. Okay, very good. We're in Pepper Pike, and we're here trying to figure out in our day and age, for our time, how will these texts be consequential to us? How will they move us? How will they allow us to guide our lives in certain directions and in certain ways? Okay, so that's the exercise for today. Are you ready? Very good. I was going to sing again, but I'm not going to sing because Rebbitzin will get angry at me and it'll ruin everything. Okay. By the way, this is my Rebbitzin. She's right over here to my left, and she also gets angry at me all the time. So it's a good thing. So all Rebbitzins are permitted to. We have at least another Rebbitzin on the line too, right? We have one more. Any other Rebbitzins there? Okay. If you'd like to be a Rebbitzin, let me know, and I know people. Okay. If you would please open your Chumash or go to the first page of the text that I gave you. And is there somebody here who has a nice reading voice who wouldn't mind reading a little text in the English? I was going to ask you to do it in the Hebrew, but in the English would be okay. By the way, when I usually teach, and I didn't know what the group was, I actually usually bring the Hebrew and the English. Next time, maybe I'll do that. But today I just gave the English to kind of egalitarianize the experience so everybody can have access. By the way, anytime you read a Jewish text, a Hebrew text, a rabbinic text in English, it's like kissing a bride through a veil. Okay, kissing a bride through a veil. You're not getting all of the nuances, and nuance is very consequential and significant in all of this. So we'll try to give you a little bit of nuance. And if you feel you know some nuance or you see some nuance, please feel free to shout out and say, wait, I don't think that's what this means. Okay, you can use the Chumash. If you're looking at the Chumash, it's on page 632, or you can use the text that I provided to you. Okay, so who's reading? Who reads English? Very good. Nice, loud voice.
Exodus 10, verse 1.
Exodus 10, verse 1, page 632. Thank you. You get half my salary for today.
Everybody doesn't have.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Leviticus.
Sorry, Leviticus. He said Exodus. Yeah, Vayikra.
Well, I'm
Fantastic.
still on Passover.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for the correction. Fantastic. Let's go.
You want me, does it matter? It's the same one.
Same one, but it's a little different. You can use the one on the paper. Be better.
Whole thing?
Yeah, just read.
Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before the Lord alien fire, which God had not enjoined upon them.
Okay, Nadav and Abihu are children of Aaron. They are therefore from the caste known as Kohanim, and they are responsible for the cultic realities within the life of the ancient Israelite people. We're all good? When I use cultic, you know what I mean. I don't mean like, some weird cult, okay? The religious life of the Jewish people or the ancient Israelite people. And in particular, they're doing what? They're offering korbanot or sacrifices. Exactly what it is that they're offering, we're not exactly sure. We'll find out a little bit more. But what's unique about this particular offering?
They weren't commanded.
Right, Asher lo tziva Hashem, right? God had not commanded it. This was an act of what you would call, give me some words for this. Creativity. Innovation, piety, but personal piety, right? Not piety as connected to any kind of doctrine, but an internal feeling. So the fire that they're offering is interesting, right? They're offering a fire from a place of their own hitlahavut in Hebrew, which means what? Their own passion for this experience, right? They were elevated, exalted, somehow or another stimulated. Has anybody ever been like that? You ever had a moment of great religious piety or great religious fervor? Because sometimes, yeah, sure.
Spontaneity.
Spontaneity, same word, spontaneity, right? This is asher lo tziva. There is no command to do it. This is riffing, as young people like to say. This is kind of doing your own thing, going at it your own way. Can you imagine if the chazan stood up on the bima, right? And is singing Kol Nidre and then decides to innovate her own words, right? How would that feel for some members of the congregation? Well, hold on. Let's do this by show of hands. How many people would love it if the chazan in the middle of Kol Nidre, Kol Nidre, okay, your chazan singing Kol Nidre, right? And what's happening? You're waiting to hear it. Right? All that, you want to hear it, right? And then she starts to sing, and that's how I feel and how you should feel, and like melody and words that weren't there. I can just imagine, right? Like somebody's getting Sidurim and throwing them up there and right, yelling. And
On the other hand, I have a problem with rote prayer.
okay, good. Finally, we have a heretic over here.
Rabbi, I don't appreciate the example because it's not the same. When the Aaron's sons did what they did, as Kohanim, they broke the law. The rabbi singing something different did not break the law.
Okay, so I'm going to say to you that according to my understanding of this, the Kol Nidre of today is like the Kodesh HaKodashim, or the Holy of Holies of ancient time of the sacrifice. And we know this because the rabbis are very clear that what? That tefillah takes the place of korbanot. And so I don't know what they're doing, but somebody's having fun. Okay, so I can't see your face, but I understand what it is that you're saying. By the way, ze ki'ilu, okay? I tried to give
As if.
approximates. In other words, in today's day and age, the average Jew, right, who comes to synagogue and knows anything about the liturgy is expecting to hear the liturgy as is, right? In ancient times, what were they expecting? They're expecting the Kohanim to do exactly as God had commanded and without deviation. And there wasn't a lot of room for this kind of creativity, which today I think we try to praise, understand that rote experience is what? Is rote experience. And for many people, it works, but for many, it doesn't. Look, let's just say this very honestly. The average age in this room of this group of individuals is indicative of the reality of the Jewish world in general, okay? Which is what? That young people are not necessarily in our community, the liberal community, attracted to this kind of engagement. They're more engaged at 10:30 probably than they are at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? People tend to come late. But on the other hand, they're not as engaged as many of us are in tefillah in the way in which many of us feel a chiyuv, a dedication and a commitment to engage and participate, okay? So creativity, as you said, is very important. I don't want rote tefillah. The question in the final analysis is, can you create some synthesis of both creativity as well as the baseline? Can you do that? And by the way, I don't yet know a synagogue that's doing it perfectly, but this has been a assurance, so it could be that you have found a way to do it. Sure.
Because what about circumcision of the heart? Can you not have, in a modern version of these prayers, a real engagement of the heart, as opposed to even those who are dead set about keeping the tradition, have the heart or don't have it, feeling, married to it all emotionally.
Yeah, I'm sure you are 100% right that you can. By the way, it's very nice that Jesus gets quoted in this space. Circumcise your heart. Very nice. I appreciate that we're expanding beyond our own religious tradition. I see somebody's got a question.
Nelson.
That's Nelson.
Oh, yeah.
Nelson, that is when I grow up.
No, I'm just repeating what was said, but nobody ever literally does the same song. Nobody creative does. They trill, they emphasize some words as opposed to others. And I don't expect to hear the same thing over and over and over again. I expect to hear maybe the family or a family resemblance. I'm a philosopher. That's a famous philosophical simile. But I don't expect to hear the same thing. And if I did, I'd go elsewhere.
So it's very interesting. I spent 2 years as the rabbi in Tokyo, Japan. One of the great honors that I had was to be a judge at some music contests, right? And it's fascinating. There would be international contests. Let's say it's violin or piano. And the Japanese always came in second or third, never first. And the question was why? Go ahead, Rabbi. They didn't bring what?
They didn't bring the creativity.
Right. They did it exactly takatu, right? As it is written. It's written this way, right? And they didn't bring any of themselves. And so when the judges were adjudicating who was really talented, they said, yeah, that's the way it was written, but there was no soul, no neshama, right? There was no heart in it. And the creativity was absolutely necessary. By the way, you're building a wonderful argument for where we're going to go in this conversation.
So I'm gonna make a counter argument.
Other argument, of course.
So the sons of Aaron are told to do it a certain way. And so there's so I want to focus on a sense that we're talking about taste or hearing. I want to think about the smell. So there was all kinds of innards being burnt on the altar. So there's a reason that the incense smells a certain way. And instead they bring the Eish Zarah. It would be like if you go into the house and you're expecting maybe the smell of chicken soup, and instead you smell the scent of skunk weed.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're like, who's smoking it? Like, what's going on here? Right? Such a different smell that wasn't ordained.
So I think we have a nice machloket, a nice argument here. We'll say you're going to be on the side of the creativity because I don't want rote, and you're on the side of there's something that
if I had broke it instead of the middle matzah. So all the children are waiting at the Seder. That's the part of the Seder they care the most about, and they know how it goes.
Yeah,
and they know I'm going to break it. I'm going to hide it under the pillow.
Let me make
they
it more
know
difficult.
how it's going to go.
Rabbi, let me make it more difficult for you. What if they didn't break the middle matzah, but they broke the top matzah? How consequential would that be to the conversation? So the question is, how?
What about tradition?
Second, okay. How punctilious do you think that we need to be if the agenda is the heart?
What if I put a piece of pizza in there and it wasn't the top?
So, okay, but here's a very interesting story. How many people had an orange on their Seder plate this year? How many people had a star fruit on their Pesach Seder this year? By the way, there are people who literally take a piece of bread and they wrap it in saran wrap and they put it on their Seder plate now. So your Bubby and my Bubby would say, right? Like we're not supposed to do that. But then the rationale for why an individual cleans their house, changes their dishes, checks for the chametz, and then takes a piece of bread and puts it on the Seder plate, that's called consciousness. That's called engagement.
Why do they do it?
Pardon me?
Why do they do that?
What they're trying to show us is actually a symbol. You see, the Seder is done in many different ways, right? There's the taste, there's the smell, there's the kinesthetic, the doing, and there is the seeing. And so for people who are not really engaged in Jewish life, and Pesach, by the way, still the number one most celebrated holiday, they want to lift the matzah and they want to lift the wrapped up bread, okay? And to say, here's the difference. By the way, you know where bread was invented? Egypt. Whole concept of rising, of fermenting comes from Egypt. And what is it? It's a matter of ego. Ego. Chametz is ego. It's the inflated self. So in order to show somebody, you want to show I got an educator, right? She was my educator in Columbus 25 years ago. Well, wonderful. And he hasn't changed one bit. Right. But if you want people to see and smell and taste and experience, you got to show them. This is matzah. This is bread. It's like when we hold up matzah and shmura matzah, the difference between the two, right? You see it, you experience it. So some people say, it's wrong, it's Pesach, you shouldn't have bread. On the other hand, if it's a pedagogic moment in time, how often does pedagogy include breaking the rules, right? The great teacher who broke all the rules in education, but was the best teacher in the school. Anybody remember that movie? It was a crazy movie called Teachers. A guy escapes from the loony bin, right? And he shows up and they tell him he's the history teacher. Every day he comes with what? Dressed as a different person, right? Today, he's Leonardo da Vinci. He comes dressed as Leonardo da Vinci. The next day comes riding in on a horse, which he stole, right? It's a whole movie. By the way, the kids do amazing on their AP exams. It's the best teacher ever. And they finally find the guy who'd escaped from the asylum. But he was the best teacher ever. Why? He was unfettered by the rules. He drew outside of the lines. And in some way, this experience, we're looking at these two young priests who are inspired by this moment in time, this 8th day. By the way, the 8th day of assembly, right? The Mishkan is built, the tabernacle is built. 8. What does the number 8 represent? Come on, folks, turn it on its side. Infinity.
Work week, the creative week.
The 7 is 8, but 8 is me'al.
Is us. Our creative work week begins.
Creativity. Okay, we got a hand up. Somebody's got a hand up. Somebody has manners. So Sheila first, and then we'll go to Esther.
Well, I'm not going to talk about the 8. The 8th day is a Mila, Greek Mila.
There's a reason, because it's what we call me'al lateva. It's above and beyond the unit of time. It's an experience that's transcended. By the way, since we have Rebbitzins on the line, this Rebbitzin, I have 2 boys, 2 girls and 2 boys. When the 2 boys were born, Polly, and it was really, you'll get to meet Polly. She's very shaket. She's very quiet. She has a lot of equanimity because she married well. And a lot of equanimity in her life, right? So here's Polly, gives birth, and she says, the bris is tomorrow. By the way, we had like 500 people coming to the bris. We lived on Long Island then, okay? I don't have to say anymore. We had cookies were made in shapes and all kinds of nice things. No, don't think shapes. Okay, not that shape. But they made cookies of all sorts, of the little boy, et cetera, all kinds of nice things, ready to go. Hundreds of people are coming. And she says to me, I'm taking the baby and I'm running away, and you're not bringing a guy with a knife near my baby. For 9 months, right? By the way, this is not, lots of mothers feel this way who've been through this experience. And I went through it twice, so you were very consistent in all of this. So the concept of this being something that happens, it's natural, it's the natural, this is an unnatural reality. To labor literally for so long with the gestation of a child, and then to hand it over to a guy with a knife to take a piece of foreskin, you're protecting this child. You know, mothers, when they fall, right? You ever seen a pregnant woman fall? And I've seen it many times. They fall like this. They'll fall on their back. They'll fall in any way. They won't fall on the baby, right? It's the instinct to protect. And what do? We do exactly the opposite by putting them in a perilous position. Again, Mila today, circumcision today, is not what circumcision was in antiquity. Okay, think about it, right? What we have today by way of technology and medicine. So the point is, it's a supernatural experience, a transcendent experience. It's me'al, it's above and beyond the natural reality. Okay, so we got a couple more hands. Esther, oh, wait a second. Sheila,
I didn't finish what I raised my hand originally for. We are creative in the service in the English.
Aha, okay.
We have, and there are people who resent when you have something different.
Yeah.
Michael would write, occasionally would write separate prayers.
Right.
But Rabbi, that's not what the prayer book says. So
Yeah.
The Orthodox, you can't change anything. We are willing to change. I mean, the fact that we added the imahot
Matriarchs, yeah.
was different, but that, I think that is not just a religious thing. I think that is probably what's in
Wait a
us.
second. Why are we separating between religion and humanity? Humans do religion. Religion is for humans. You're right. It's a human quality that people don't like to change. You know, the old story, right? Everybody wants change, and then you make a change, you know, and people say, well, you're changing on me. You know, we had a teacher, Ron Wolfson, who used to say that every synagogue should have over the ark? What do you have over your ark? What are the words? Know before whom you stand, or Pitzchu li sharei tzedek, open for me the gates of righteousness. He
Don't have
says
one, do we?
words, we always did it this way. We always did it
The
this
way
way.
it's done here.
Okay, Esther, Ivan. Esther, you're muted. I read lips sometimes, but not so good.
Okay, I wanted to concentrate on the two numbers, 7 and 8. 7 is an important number in our religion. And the word that I attached to 7 is good. God created the world and every day so that it was good, but it was not complete.
Right.
And that's where the Shmone comes. It's like, to me, it's like Tikkun Olam.
Yeah, lovely. Yesher koach.
Yeah, and the 7 to me, the 7 is that filling, you put in 7 times, you have 7 days for the week, you have the Shemitah, you have the Hakafot on the Hasidic, the bride goes around the groom 7 times. In Jericho, they went around 7 times. So 7 is a big, but 8 is the extra. That's why the baby boy goes through a complete week, but then to perfect him, he's not perfect. We do Brit Milah on the 8th.
Beautiful. I'm going to give you a different take. Okay. It's only the synthesis of 7 and 8, which equals 15. In Hebrew letters, what is 7 and 8 in Hebrew letters? Yud Hey, which is 15. Which is what God is only found in the synthesis of the traditional ritual and creativity. It is only the synthesis of the standard and the deviation in our tradition that ultimately works. And by the way, if you need an example, you know how many sections there are in the Haggadah of Pesach?
15.
14 and 15.
Yeah.
14 and 15. Motzi Matzah is one section, which is what in Hebrew letters? Yud Daled, which is Yad. And of course, God means hand, and it's the hand of God erupting into human history. But what is 15? Yah. It is the hand of Yah that goes into human history. It's not just a hand. It's the hand of the transcendent instrument that creates the miracle of Pesach. And if you only talk about Pesach as exodus from difficult moments in time, which you wrought or which humans wrought, you've missed the entire story of Pesach. It's not only a human experience, it's a human divine experience. And if you only talk about the divine experience, then what? You've missed out on the human hand, which has to actuate the potential for transcendence in the world. We are, as Heschel says, right? We are the hands of God. We are the feet of God. We are the eyes of God. We are the heart of God. We are the folks who feel and make this happen. We've done one verse so far. I can see this is a very interesting group. We get through the Torah in about 972 years. Ivan, go ahead.
Rabbi, you talked about Pesach. We generally talk about the fact that God passed over the Jewish homes when the day that the 10th was. But Pesach can also mean that in the Torah, we pass over the first boy in tradition, like Jacob got to lead and Joseph instead of his brothers. So in our religion, we very often pass over the firstborn.
Maybe for you to teach the class. By the way, in Yiddish, what is Pesach? Okay. Pesach. Anybody know what Asach means in Yiddish? What's Pesach?
Maleh.
Pesach has a lot of mouth, a lot of chewing, a lot of eating, and a lot of talking, okay? Nice, right? Pesach, you can use it next year if you speak Yiddish. If you don't speak Yiddish in your household, do me a favor, don't tell that. They don't understand it. I still remember there was a rabbi in Los Angeles who was giving a talk, and it was a large group of Persian Jews, 900 Persian Jews and 100 Ashkenazis. And he told the joke in Yiddish, and 100 people laughed, and 900 people turned around and looked at one another and said, "What's going on here?" Right? And what happened? He got fired. So you got to be careful when you tell the right jokes in the right time in the right place. Ivan, you get the last word.
A little bit different, going back to spontaneity versus what is routine. Nadav and Avihu were spontaneous. They were punished. They were killed by God. Moses, though, when he comes down from Sinai with the first set of tablets, is also spontaneous. He throws them, he shatters them, he incinerates them. No punishment. What is the difference?
Well, according to Rabbi Sachs, Moshe was not a Kohen.
First of all, you're right. In other words, there's a higher standard, right? It says a Kadosh Baruch Hu deals with people who are elevated, kechuta se'ara, like a hair, right? Thin line. So it's true there could be a difference, but there's something else here. Ivan,
Right. Yeah.
not Ivan. You want to answer?
Okay.
You want the answer?
Well, I think that Esther had it right there, that the priest's role is one of routine, of something that we can depend on. It's a daily, that's, whereas the prophet has to be spontaneous.
I love it. We make a distinction between those who have a responsibility to be consistent and those who have a responsibility to be creatives. And those are the kind of synthesis that we need in our community. We always, right? Remember that old story about the people, they go to the oldest member of the shul. Do we stand for the Shema? Do we sit for the Shema? Remember that joke, right? Yeah. Right? And the one guy says, we always stood for the Shema. And he says, no, that's not the way I remember it, right? Oh, we always sit for the Shema. No, that's not the way I remember it. He said, well, we're fighting all the time. Nobody knows it. He goes, that's the way I remember it. Okay, so, okay, with the, it's like, it's very good. I make my jokes for the moment in time. Okay, fantastic. Can we go a little more text? Is that okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. You want to read verse 2? We made it to verse 2. Mashiach is gekommen. Wow. Messianic era. Okay, you finished it already. Would you like to take over? And a fire came forth.
And a fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the insistence of the Lord.
Right. By the way, it originally said instance of God, right? Which means somewhat the same thing. This is the insistence of God. This is God's determination. God decides that the fire is coming out not to consume their sacrifice, but to consume them. They are themselves, what? The sacrifice, okay? And, the whole notion of becoming a sacrifice on some level is very beautiful. Can you imagine talking about yourself as sacrificing your neshama to the Lord, right? We say on Yom Tov, "Ani tefilati," and I am my own prayer. I am my own sacrifice. My life becomes in service to ideals that are higher, and many of us sacrifice our lives. And not just in religious work, people who do all kinds of work, teachers, doctors, people who are in all kinds of fields who really give themselves over. It's called Mesirat Nefesh, right? Giving literally over your soul. Okay. Again, as we read this, what do you think about these young people? Why is God so exacting with them? Why does God punish them? They did this out of what?
Maybe they wanted such devekut. Maybe they wanted to bind with Hashem so much that they said, God, take us now.
Okay.
And they died, lifnei Adonai.
Wait a second, you're jumping to the end. Okay, but there's a long way to go before there. But we got a couple of comments. We got waving fingers, tingling fingers, happy fingers here, right? Dancing fingers. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to point out that verse 10:2 and verse 9:24 are nearly identical.
Right.
So if it was good in verse 9:24, why are we saying it's bad in verse 10:2?
Here's my simple answer.
And if it didn't say Eish Zara,
right,
maybe we're misinterpreting what Zara means. Maybe it was a good thing.
Okay. So Zara just means foreign.
Yeah.
By the way, maybe we think, because we know Avodah Zara in rabbinic tradition means what? Foreign service.
Pagan.
Well, pagan service, for it means whatever was not commanded. On the other hand, the notion of something that is exotic. Hold on. How many people go for Chinese food? How many people go, by the way, in America, you know how you experience culture? You go eat their food, right? We're doing Chinese tonight, right? Right? We're doing Chinese tonight. It's not, it's Christmas, right? Okay. But understand, Zara can really, as we see it here, clearly has a negative connotation. But if you spend a little time unpacking it, is the foreign, is the alien negative? And by the way, don't we have a commandment in the Torah about aliens?
Yeah.
What is the alien? Right. Welcome the stranger. Ki avadim hayitem. Right? Because once upon a time you were sojourners in a strange place. So the notion that we do something that's extra canonical, that's outside of our own tradition, in and of itself, is that a negative? Particularly think now as a postmodern American. Look, how many people have integrated into their practice yoga? The other day, there was a young woman who said to me something really interesting. She asked me the question, is yoga cultural appropriation? You know what cultural appropriation is? This is the buzzword of the era of anybody under the age of 25, right? You're not allowed to do anything that belongs to another culture because it means as if you're taking over their culture. So when you do yoga, it's not your tradition. So what are you doing yoga, right? You don't look like somebody you're not a yogi, right? You don't come from that tradition. America, you can be anything you want to be, right? Tomorrow morning, you could wake up and you could say, my pronoun is she, or he, or they. It's America. By the way, I'm not making fun of it. It's the reality of living in America. So when we look at Torah from a postmodern lens, you have to say what? Maybe Eish Zara, foreign fire. Maybe this stuff that wasn't commanded by God on one level might be negative. But maybe there's something to learn from the fact that people had so much exuberance, so much creativity, so much spontaneity, so moved that what? Here's my daughter, this is Noah. She's 24. She's in medical school and she's making her parents very happy. Okay. And this is, so I want to tell you a great story. We go to B'nai Jeshurun, not B'nai Yeshurun, B'nai Jeshurun in New York. Okay. We go to shul. And it's a very meditative, contemplative experience. It's taking a very long time. And before the Shema, the rabbi says in a South American accent, and I won't do my South American accent because that's cultural appropriation. And he says, now everybody focus on the Shema Yisrael, close your eyes and breathe. And we're there for 1 minute and 2 minutes and 3 minutes. No, it must have been 3 or 4. And she finally says, no, Shema Yisrael. And it's this cacophonous building, and you hear this little voice singing out the Shema Yisrael. So at some point, you say, Nushoin, like, get on with it. Let's get going. Enough of this meditating on your pupik. Let's get going with the rituals. Think about it. If this, right, lunch is getting cold or whatever, right, all the things that happen, there is a certain amount of time. I remember going in Israel to the leader minyan, right? The leader minyan, you go to the leader minyan, it would start at 8. And at about 8:30, people would finish their meditation. We'd start singing and start singing and start singing. I took my kids there one time. They break in the middle for lunch and then come back. Musaf ended at 2:00 in the afternoon. Okay. And guess what? Almost everybody, except us, stayed to the end because enough of these people had a transcendent experience that moved them beyond. Now, the question is, did they daven the Shema in the right time? Did they get it done in the right way? Did people have kavanah throughout I don't know. There's a lot of halachot, there's a lot of legalisms that we could talk about that they may have abrogated. But did the people who go have a transcendent experience? And here's the question. What happened? What would have happened if these 2 Kohanim abrogated the law, offered this, and a fire came out from the Lord and consumed the fire and accepted the gift? What would have happened? What would have happened?
Calamity.
What would have happened? It could have been the beginning of what? Religion is about spontaneity. And then everybody who is doing the cultic realities going forward would say, what? I insert myself into the process in a way that's meaningful to me. Or it could have been the end of what? Organized religion as we knew it. It could have destroyed the rubric. And
Rabbi, I have a question.
Hold on. Breaking of the vessels, not for the purpose of building something new, but for not having vessels to contain what the exuberance that people feel. Why do we have a religious tradition? Why? It's why your soul has a body. There has to be a container. There has to be limitations placed on it in some kind of ways. Otherwise, our souls will fly off into the nether regions or into the ether. So containment is an important part of religious experience as well, at least for those of us who live by a kind of coda of how we're going to do this thing called religious life. Okay, a question down below, and then we got a few more questions. Yeah.
How can we view Adam and Avihu as being human sacrifices when we are taught in Judaism that the blood of a human being cannot be accepted?
Nobody's eating it.
Some of these so-called
Hold on,
would argue that
you're getting very involved in the nuance of this, which is important. But I want to say to you, nobody ate Nadav and Avihu. Okay, nobody ate them. They were not consumed by humans. They were consumed by the fire that came from the Lord. By the way, we have other people who go up to heaven in fire. Remember somebody? His name is Elijah, right? And he's not consumed. So if you don't see the comparison between the two, right? If, at least according to what I think the standard operating procedure here is, if you do it right, like Elijah, you could be carried away in fire and not be singed. He's not the only one, by the way. Also Enoch, right? Enoch never dies, right? You can be. But if you don't do it kishuga, according to the halacha, according to the prescribed way, the danger is that you can lose yourself in this process, and therefore there is no more rubric. Look, I got to tell you something. We don't call our parents by their first names, okay? Why is that? We don't. That doesn't mean you don't. Some people do, and that's okay, right? But that's just we don't. Because at some point in time, familiarity breeds contempt. There is a difference between an Abba and a Saba and a child. And we've lost that in many places in the world today, right? Now, it's interesting. There are many, many people say, I'm now a CEO, not a rabbi in the classic sense. But there are people, particularly of a certain age, who come to me, and no matter what, I will always call you rabbis. They call me Carnie, they'll always call me rabbi. Why? Because I don't need that kind of familiarity with you in that kind of way. I have too much kavod for, not for you, but for the position that you occupy. It's interesting, okay? So on some level, we have to be very careful about creating a familiarity that says, I can do it any way I want to. And again, just think about your own religious life. How much creativity is there and how much rubric is there that's been handed down midor ledor from generation to generation. Okay, Nelson the philosopher, okay, go ahead.
All right, well, you're familiar with familiarity, but if we all grew up in a tradition that was very creative, we would expect something quite different. And we have to imagine something quite different. But the point I originally wanted to make was that maybe we're focusing on the wrong part of what happened to the boys. The problem was Aaron was being punished by losing his two sons. And the reason he's being punished is he didn't prepare them for being rigid. He didn't rehearse them. He didn't give them practice.
It takes me to where I want to go so that I can debunk this whole notion. Okay.
Go for it.
So thank you so much. It's wonderful to have a foil against which to have this conversation, okay? But let's just make sure we understand the rest of the story, right? What ends up happening is the two children are zapped, right? Nadav and Avihu are zapped. Yatsa nishmatam, right? Their souls disappear. Exactly what it looked like, we don't know. We mostly think that what happened is their innards, right, were burnt to a crisp, meaning their neshama left them. The body wasn't necessarily burnt. We don't know exactly what happened. But what happens is, Vayidom Aharon, right? Aaron says nothing. Now, silence in our tradition, the rabbinic tradition, shtika kehoda'a dameh, which means what? That you acknowledge that this is the right thing to happen, right? Shtika kehoda'a. You acknowledge that it's an acquiescence through silence. We know Jews, right? Pardon me?
Oh, he's stunned.
Okay, it could be something else. It could be that he's utterly stunned. It's so traumatic. It's so difficult for him that it doesn't even need to know, right? It's like the child at the Seder Sheino Yodeh Lishol, who doesn't even know what to ask. It's not that they don't know, they just don't know what to ask. Look, all of us have lived lives. Have you ever lost somebody suddenly? That's so profound, difficult. You don't even know what to do with it. You don't have the kelim, you don't have the vessels to even address the profundity. So what do? You sit in silence. By the way, sitting in silence, right, with somebody who is a mourner, is an avel, is what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to talk to them. You're supposed to wait till they talk to you. And it can be very uncomfortable because we're a talking society. But what happens? What happens? People don't know what to do with themselves. So Shiva, instead of becoming a time of mourning and quiet and inwardness, becomes a time for what? Fish and talking and schmoozing. And we don't know what to do with ourselves in the silence. But Aaron is silent for whatever the reasons are that we thought around here, right? And then you have this by Moshe, right? Bekrovaya Kadesh. It's people who are closest to me will make me known and make me more sanctified in the world. And somehow that's supposed to appease Aaron. Okay. By the way,
isn't the power of speech silence?
Pardon me, say it again.
Power of speech is silence.
Right. Or at least the power of speech is the break between talking and speaking. Hi, Rabbi. Hi. Right? Listen, you have a wonderful orator on your bima. I've heard him now a few times. Right? And I've watched very carefully. Right? Think about when your rabbi pauses. He pauses not only to breathe. He also pauses to give you a chance to think of what it is that he's just said. Or you'll hear rabbis do this as a wonderful patent, right? It's not a trick, it's a style to repeat a line. Because we understand that we're speaking quickly. We got our eyes on the watches too. I know. Did you come to get me because I'm late? Oh, okay. Okay.
The new tech setup and hear from a great rabbi.
Oh, very good. He came for the technology. Very good. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. But the key here is that what? The key here is this experience of the combination of silence and speaking. So it reverberates within you and you say, oh, Rabbi Hal stopped for a moment because he wants me to think about what it is that's safe. And sometimes we'll even say, right, to the kahal, think about that for a moment. Rest into that, ease into that, right? There's something about that that's really important. So you're right, Esther, that words only make sense if there's an end of a sentence. Think about Torah reading. There's a sof pasuk. There's a reason. Now, sometimes people reading Torah really quickly, I have children like this, who read really quickly, you don't get the end of the thought. Amen, right? Okay. Especially in the triennial cycle, it goes so quickly. Okay, so you don't really get it all. But the stuff is there for a reason. And anet nachta, in the middle of a pasuk, is a moment to pause, to rest into it. Very important. Okay, can I try to do something else with you? So I leave you with something a little neo-Hasidic, okay? But in order to do that, I have to go to something Hasidic to be neo on it, okay? So I want you to understand something very important, okay? Hasidic texts are based on what? They're based on a mystical tradition. If you think that, like, remember that movie Dancing with Wolves? I think always that when people think about Hasidim, they think dancing with Hasidim. Like a guys with curly cues and furry hats dancing around, yabba, okay? Hasidim are not those people. Hasidim are very often, particularly those who are mystically inclined, interested in a very deep and spiritual reality that is catalyzed sometimes by singing and dancing, right? Think about whirling dervishes, right? And
They also worship through love.
Lo shamati otach.
Worship through love.
They worship through love. I think that's a big difference between Hasidim and non-Hasidim. They don't worship God out of fear, they worship out of love.
Okay, so I think you're right. I think there's a lot of yirah and pachad in Hasidic texts as well. So we can make that argument. We should study together a little bit, Esther. We can have a good bar plukta. We could argue with one another. But I think that there is something more than that. It is more than simply that kind of notion. It is the notion that there is something that happens in the experience that's more than love. It's not just love. It is actually a transcendent experience that happens in a kind of a hugging and wrestling reality with something and living with it in a different kind of way, really pushing it to its edge, okay? And I mean that intellectually, I mean that spiritually, and I even mean it psycho-spiritually, meaning in terms of what does it do for you in your own intellect, in your own heart, in your own mind, in your own neshama. So I want to take you to a text that it becomes the precursor. Hasidim are not disembodied dancing and singing individuals, okay? Like dancing with Hasidim, that's what it's all about. Where do they base themselves mostly? They base themselves mostly on the Zohar, right? On the book of brilliance, right? Supposedly written by Shimon Bar Yochai in a cave in the 2nd century, but we know it's Moses de Leon in the 13th century who collects this very powerful material, right? And I want to take you to page 7 and look at a Zoharic comment here, okay? Come and see. By the way, come and see. What does that mean? When I say to you, look, listen, what am I telling you? Pay attention. In other words, the Zohar says, open your eyes. By the way, the Zohar opens with the words, right? Open your eyes and see the majesty of the world. What a great way to start a mystical life. You know, how many people walk by every single day? I've been walking the same route here, right? I come from my house to come to the shul, and I walk the same route. And every time I come down the same path, I notice something different, right? Yesterday, I didn't see that flower. Oh, yesterday I didn't see that dog who was pooping on somebody's grass, right? That is whatever's happening. But I noticed the world that's around me. And that's open your eyes and see. And by the way, do the same thing with smell. Right now, the spring is coming, right? And the sounds, and you hear so much, right? And in my neighborhood, it's the sound of lawnmowers all the time, 24 hours a day, probably your leaf blowers. That's what's going on 24 hours a day. Okay, come and see. Although Aaron's signs died at that time, it was fitting in several ways. What are they saying? What's the Zohar, the book of brilliance, the deepest book of Jewish mysticism saying? It made sense that they died. First, it was not the time for incense ascends only at certain times. In other words, religion only works in a certain way. If I just said, okay, guys, let's daven Ma'ariv now, what would you say to me?
You crazy?
They already say I'm crazy, not to worry, okay? But it's not the right time. You've got it wrong, right? How do you know that? By the way, think back to Pesach. What do they say to the rabbis? It's time for what? For the and what are you doing instead? You're doing all this talking and discussing. Now, whatever was happening at that seder doesn't really matter, but at least from a halachic perspective, there is a time and purpose for everything under heaven, right? Kol davar be'ito, everything in its appropriate time. Okay. Aaron shall burn it aromatic incense morning and afternoon, etc., etc., etc. So that oil and incense may be as one as written. The psukim are not important. At these times, it is offered, not at any other time, except when plague prevails in the world, as happened when it was written, right? And Aaron took a fire pan and incense. In other words, when can you abrogate the rules? Tell me, when can you abrogate? In an emergency. Stop for a moment. Are we living in an emergency?
Yes.
How much? It's a good
Well, are
question.
we living in a show of hands? How many people say we're living in a time of emergency? Okay, how many people say we're not living in a time of emergency? Would Woody Allen say we're living in a time of emergency? No, that's
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Always.
Oh, in an emergency. But here's the point. If this is a spiritual conversation, then we are absolutely living in a time of emergency. Why? Because fewer and fewer people are mining the tradition in search of what? Spiritual consequence and meaning.
Yeah.
At least our tradition. They may be mining many traditions, right? Again, I say, not because I want to pick on yoga, but how many people are involved in yoga? How many people are involved in meditation? How many people are involved in Eastern religious traditions in one way or another? All of these things, right? It infiltrates our lives. Why? Because the standard average American is looking for what? Meaning and consequence, and the great religions that are extant in our world right now are not necessarily providing. You know what the fastest growing religion is in America? Mormonism, okay, right? And the second, Islam. And particularly the kind of Islam that is dealing with the mystical orientation to Islam. Okay. So are we living in a time of emergency? Absolutely, yes. I think so. We're living in a time of emergency. And I think that's what it comes to teach us. Okay, I want to finish with one text, okay? And then we'll let you go. If you have to go, please feel free. By the way, when I spoke at the seminary, I was the graduation speaker at the commencement. And Al Gore was speaking right before me, and Al Gore spoke, and 400 of the 500 people got up and walked out. So I'm used to people walking out on me, okay? It's okay, it's okay.
I'm just here to say the Torah services.
Okay, fantastic, Torah service, okay. But I want to take a look with you at this last text, okay? So if you would, look at the Mei HaShiloach. This is the text that you can find right at the back of the package, okay? The Mei HaShiloach was the Ishbitzer Rebbe, Rabbi Mordechai Lehner, okay? Right at the very, very back page, okay? I'm going to read a little bit for you. The death of Nadav and Avihu as related is related to what is said in Pirkei Avot. Who is wise? One who sees what is born in the future. Ezu hachacham. Normally we say, who's wise? The person who what? Hanoet alot is this. No, but what do we normally say? We normally say, who is wise? One who learns from all people, right? But we have an alternative, which is haroet hanolad, who sees what's going to be born. Okay, so that's a wise person. What does that mean? Which means not to be overly clever, becoming involved in predictions of the future. Yet still, we are to fulfill the advice of seeing what is born in the future. In other words, don't spend so much time being a futurologist. Live a little bit in the present, but also keep an eye to the future as well, right? One does this by looking into the very action he is doing, deeply investigating and contemplating whether this action is refined to the extent that it will be endure for all time, even in the world to come. The matter of the incense offering is, as is said in the Holy Zohar, what is incense? Ketoret. It is the connection, ketira, of everything. I could go on in this text, but I want to stop here. Okay.
By the way, my father always told us, move on.
Move on. Okay. So I want to move on, but I also want to rest into this for just a moment. Okay. What's being said here by the Mei HaShiloach, which is very radical? The radical reality is that, yes, you utilize the Ketoret, you utilize the incense, you utilize the ritual, you utilize the tradition. But what is it that you're supposed to do with it, right? It's supposed to be a what? A ketira, something that ties you, right, in some kind of profound way to the tradition. In other words, if a religious practice and a religious tradition is unable to be explained in a way that ties you in some kind of consequential way to the religious tradition, to the transcendent, to the divine, that religious practice needs to come under scrutiny to decide whether or not it still has consequence and meaning, not only for you as an individual, but the question becomes, does it have meaning and consequence for the Jewish people as a whole? And I want you for a moment, before we take our leave of this place, to think of this is the session for today, two things. Number one, can you give me an example of a practice that still might feel arcane to you or might feel arcane to others, but still feels like it ties you in some kind of profound spiritual way to the tradition? Yes, just name the tradition.
Kissing the mezuzah
On the door.
on the door.
By the way, great example, because it's not a halacha, it is a minhag, it is a custom. And yet, for many people, it is what? Very consequential. Why? Because what do you say? Shomer daltot Israel, Shaddai. God is the protector of the doorways of Israel. And as you go in and you go out, you acknowledge exactly what it says in the Shema, that you acknowledge the presence of God, that God is echad, even in the moments when you're coming in and out, in those mundane moments, right, which are all part of our lives, but it becomes one of those traditions that still makes sense. Okay, anybody else? Hold on. Somebody else. A tradition that still makes sense to you. Yeah, no, come on, I want somebody else. It still makes sense, yes.
I've had a problem with dietary restrictions.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary in this time because we are much more plain,
So you're saying here's one that doesn't make sense. You're going in the opposite direction.
doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense to me, or not. I don't want to use the word sense. It doesn't resonate within me as a spiritual discipline that I want to take upon myself, because what doesn't it do for me? It doesn't move me to that transcendent place. It doesn't kosheroti. It doesn't tie me to the transcendent experience, which I believe Judaism is all about.
But I see it as
But Rabbi, I don't think it's important that I know and
non-practical.
understand everything. I don't have to know where I'm going.
Hold on,
Esther?
1 second. Just 1 second, Esther. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not practical in today's world.
okay.
That's my
So
opinion.
I think you gave a good example. Now we're going to have a counter argument, right? The counter argument is going to come from Esther Amalka, and she's going to tell us that Matul Salagid, please go ahead.
You're muted.
You're muted, Esther. Slicha. Oh,
No, I was thinking of the musical Sunday in the Park. And it says, it doesn't matter if you know or you don't know where you're going. You have to step ahead and continue.
right. So I'm with you.
It's not important if I know or understand everything that is in my tradition. I accept it and I move on.
So I think that there are many people who have that kind of emunah, that kind of faith. And many times I do as well. Sometimes I simply do it because my dad did it, my Zeta did it, his Zeta did it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory was my teacher. And he used to say to me, I keep Jewish tradition, not because it makes sense. I keep Jewish tradition because why? Because it's my Zeta. It is my Zeta. It's my way to my Zeta. It's my way, and I appreciate that. But on the other hand, the question becomes, in a time and a place where we are losing more Jews than we can manufacture, literally, right? The question is, where do we put the dagesh chazak? Where do we put that? On which syllable do we put the emphasis? Do we put the emphasis on the rituals and the traditions as they were? Or do we say, if we can find a way in which to talk about that which is, for you use the term logical, but I'll use the term consequential, meaningful, existential. If we talked about Yiddishkeit, right, Judaism in that kind of way, right, and said, okay, some things will fall by the wayside naturally, essentially, absolutely out of necessity, because they no longer resonate. We have to think about that for our next generation of people, and then we'll think about what will the Seder look like, or what will any ritual look like? What will a bar mitzvah look like? Look, when I started teaching B'nai Mitzvah, I'm now 28 years a rabbi. Okay, I know I don't look that old, right? Nobody even laughed at that part. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Okay. When I started teaching bar mitzvahs, kids went to Hebrew school 4 days a week, and everybody came to Sunday school, and most kids, their parents left them to shul on Shabbos. So by the time a kid became a bar mitzvah, they likely what? They likely knew a lot by the time by osmosis at very least, okay? But that isn't the reality of today. And what's so interesting is on some level, we still expect our kids to produce like we did way back when, and we don't give them the training. And by the way, we don't give them the training because we've made other choices, whether it's soccer or baseball or dance or music or legitimate things, right? I mean, I don't want to say they're not legitimate, or work, right? Parents can't get kids here, right? But by the way, usually parents who want their kids to give, the rabbis and cantors and educators and synagogues and temples will find a way. The question becomes, is it what we want? And is it consequential enough as essentially for us to knock ourselves out for any practice, education, kashrut, a million other things? Okay, we've got two hands up.
If we don't
And
follow
some,
the rules, the rituals, we make our own.
okay, so on some level, I understand it. The slope of creativity is that it's creative. And what will happen is some things will disappear. And the question is that good or is that bad? I'm not making the judgment. I'm laying out the problematics in front of you, which I think come directly from this conversation of Nadav and Avihu. The rabbis in the final analysis will say what? The halachis will say, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it destroys the religious tradition. It's a bad thing because it's not respectful of their father. It's a bad thing because God punished them. On the other hand, somebody said it earlier. Rabbi Shalom said it earlier. Is it possible that what happened to Nadav and Avihu was not a punishment, but rather was what?
Teaching.
What happened to them? Their souls went directly to
God.
Heaven.
They were absorbed into the totality of the Godhead. Now, if I could tell you right now that you know that you would go to paradise right now, whatever paradise means to you, my definition of paradise and yours might be a little different, okay? But, okay, if you could go to Gan Eden right now, would you punch the ticket? Most people, I don't know what they would say, but I'm sure there's a population of people who would say, if I could go into that, I would, okay? By the way, it tends to be people.
I'm in no rush to get there.
All the time.
Yeah, right, I'm waiting for my 70 virgins. Wait a minute. Okay, that's not gonna happen to you. Sorry. Okay, so we got two questions.
Deny.
Don't even say. Nelson and David, you got a comment, please.
So I just wanted to say, maybe it's my personality, but it's Torah study that really gives me this connection. And I crave it. And it's what I don't like about traditional congregations. There's almost no opportunity for Torah study. There's lots of ritual of various kinds, and they're interesting. I spend a lot of my time in the rituals studying what's in the text, but it's this kind of thing by a Zoom, which really helps me.
Yeah, no, so God bless you. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you found your place. I will say to you, what you're saying is that the intellectual on some level is what does it for you, right? That stimulation stimulates your heart, your mind, your soul, your spirit, and that's wonderful. David, you word, I think Scro has to get the last word.
Yeah, so when I was in leadership at the shul and we were doing strategic planning, one of the things we learned is that there's lots of different ways for people to come in, and we need to be welcoming in a lot of ways. So maybe it's not religious services for everybody, but for some people, maybe it's this class or studying. But I did want to make a comment about the dietary laws, which are also a big part of this parasha. Maybe you're right, they're connected, and I never thought of that before, so thank you. With what happens to Nadav and Avihu. But I think it's both a quest for meaning, but also connectedness, both to our people in the here and now and over time. In reality, we all restrict what we eat one way or another for one reason or another. This is just our particular restrictions, which some of us believe are commanded by God, and some of us believe are tradition and not necessarily commanded per se. Whatever you believe, though, the observing the dietary laws is a way of connecting over time to the people who came before and might come after. And as David Kramer says in his very lovely monograph about Jewish eating through the ages, part of what you get from kashrut is the same kind of thing you get from Shabbat, which is connectedness to the people and a kind of chance at continuity. But it has to have meaning for you. And it seems to me one of the meanings that I get out of it is a sense of connectedness and a sense of, you know, the Shema says to love God. How do you love the ineffable? One way might be to do things that are elevating, that are kadosh, separate and elevated. And maybe the dietary laws can be that if you look at them that way.
The Rambam actually says that kashrut is part of health.
That's it.
Being divided now. We
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to stay here.
I'm going to answer. You can go. No one has to stay. I'm not holding anybody. But David, I want to say, first of all, spoken very much like a synagogue president, appropriately so. No, that there have to be.
So I outed myself, huh?
But the Rambam says that we keep kashrut for health reasons.
1 second, David. So I want to just answer to you that there's multiple portals of entry are always important in the synagogue environment, okay? The question will become, and by the way, you got 3, right, conservative synagogues that are within, what, 1 mile, 2 miles of one another. And the question is, what is the, on which syllable are you going to put the emphasis? Where is going to be the dagesh chazak of the institution? And by the way, I've davened now in all 3 places, so I can tell you there are different emphases at each of in the conservative synagogues within this area. And people choose those synagogues in part because of the emphasis that's put on. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I
100%.
love right. And I just think it's really important for us to think about that. However, right, each community for itself is going to need to decide what is going to be that which becomes transcendent for them, right? And what are we going to give up on and what are we going to hold on to that ultimately in a postmodern reality will be consequential for our young people. And I think that you're offering, David Kramer, who was my teacher, by the way, both at Klal and also at the seminary, has one orientation. But I also know David to be a very broad spiritual thinker. He gets much of his spirituality from playing the drums, okay? Much of his personal... Yeah, no problem. Okay, so again, multiple portals of entry. The question is, where is it going to be? We have people who come to shul for all kinds of reasons, to temples and synagogues for all kinds of reasons, and that's wonderful. But this exercise today was to say, what are we going to allow to come in and come out? And I'll say it personally, it always has a semi-permeable membrane. Not all goes in and not all goes out. There's always a winnowing out over the course of time, and for each person deciding what stays in and remains relevant and consequential. Okay, Esther Amalka, you get the last word.
Something too, Carnie.
First of all, to answer David, the Rambam says that kashrut is part of health. But I wanted to bring something completely different. Archaeologists found a lot of the machtar, which is what the Aaron's sons used at the Mizbeach, which I found fascinating. And they're all, you can look it up on Google, the pictures of the different machtars that were at the time.
Right. Listen, the notion of the use of incense and smell and sound and all of these rituals is something that transcends any one religious tradition. Right? Have you ever been in a different kind of davening? If you want to go see how Yemenites daven, see how Moroccans daven. I got a Moroccan, the Galia's on the line with us here, right? But what it looks like for people to be in different environments and in different ways. And sometimes you walk in and it feels completely odd and different to you. And by the way, we seem to be okay with it when it's the traditional different. But what if you walked into a reconstructionist or renewal environment and it was looked completely different and the words and the melodies and and then suddenly what? Suddenly you hear what? Shema Yisrael, and you say, oh, it's from us. And by the way, remember the story from the Bet Midrash, right? Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the house of study, right? And of Rabbi Akiva, right? And having all sorts of conversations. And finally he says what? Halakha Moshe Sinai. Right? This is the law that comes from Sinai. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, thank God, at least they remember who I am. I've got to day and age. We would be to adopt an organization that says, in whatever way, shape, or form people participate in Jewish life, we should honor it, respect it, and fan that flame for people to feel connected. Because as I said, we can't manufacture Jews as fast as we're losing them. And so in order to ensure our survival and our own flourishing beyond survival, we need to think about a combination of tradition and change, of innovation and creativity laminated to the ways of the past, which will by necessity mean some things will come in and some things will come out. And some of us will be really comfortable with that. And some of us will be uncomfortable with that. And you know, religion is here to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable.
As long as we
don't-
personal identity, Rabbi. I know a lot of people in my synagogue who come purely for identity.
Yep.
Some come just because this is what we do.
Yeah.
The more questions we're going to ask, and my father always said when we questioned him so much on what's the big deal about turning on lights on Shabbat? It's an easy act. My dad always said to me, look at a bottle of wine. The more you're going to add water to it, the more you're going to lose the essence of what it really is. So if we're going to up on the kashrut, and questioning all that we question, and rightly so, but there gotta be a heart that we cannot disturb if that is our common denominator.
I couldn't say it better. I couldn't say it worse, but I couldn't say it better. Looking forward to meeting the people who are here. I thank the people who are on from, I think Jane might be walking at the same time. I hope you're getting your exercise at the same time, which is wonderful.
No, I'm listening. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. It's nice to see you.
Shabbat Shalom, Yasher
Yasher
Koach.
Koach, Shabbat Shalom.
Very good, very enlightening.
Very enlightening. Okay, very good. I'm waiting for a review.